Like if I had family members that were being deported and this guy's out here saying like, oh, I think they should want to be Epic, or family members that worked for USAID or any of these government institutions, and Asmongold is sitting here like laughing with his teeth falling out, making $1 million a month about how epic it is that they're all getting fired and shit. I don't like that conservatives have reset the standards online and that they can act in some of the most deplorable subhuman ways possible and then turn around and cry civility politics when they're supporting stuff that is literally destroying people's lives. I wholly reject that. And I will continue to be unhinged about it because I think the normalization of all of this shit is fucking unreal. So people are allowed to have a difference of opinions about things. The difference of opinions is whether or not somebody's getting deported from this country with no due process. That's not a simple matter of a difference in opinion. It is a violent action from the United States.
The time has come to examine political violence and the rhetoric that leads up to it. Because there is a very unfortunate pattern and some very bad political discourse and some very stupid takes that we have been witnessing in the last 10 years or so. Which is that there's a lot of people out there, both social media influencers, as they're sometimes called, and corporate statist media journos, who just kind of appear to have no sense of responsibility for the wide audiences that they reach.
Hey,
unless
that's me.
They see nothing wrong with using rhetoric that is effectively a call to violence. As it's sometimes called engaging in just obvious stochastic terrorism. But anyways, to really understand what exactly I mean by rhetoric that kind of counts as a call to violence, let's just start with a very simple run-of-the-mill example from Destiny.
No! Like, the problem is that people like Asmongold will never admit it, but Asmongold has already said things that I think would entitle him to a full-on ass whipping if certain people saw him in public. Like if I had family members that were being deported and this guy's out here saying like, oh, I think they should want to be fucking Epic, or family members that worked for USAID or any of these government institutions, and Asmongold is sitting here like laughing with his teeth falling out, making $1 million a month about how epic it is that they're all getting fired and shit. Like he's already so far beyond the pale. Where's the lie?
In terms of reputation, which is what I usually do when I show a clip of our Bedtoid, there's not much here other than the fact that the private sector tends to create more jobs than the public sector, and thus whining about Doge taking away jobs from USAID isn't really a good argument because more jobs would have been created had that money been left in the private aid. Isn't more job show a clip of our Bedtoid. There's not much here other than the fact that the private sector tends to create more jobs than the public sector.
The private sector tends to create more jobs than the public sector. What a weird way to compare the two. The public sector could theoretically create an infinite number of jobs. It's dictated by whatever the government says. So that's a really weird comparison, I guess, but okay.
And thus whining about Doge taking away jobs from USAID isn't really a good argument because more jobs would have been created had that money been left in the private sector anyway.
But they wouldn't create the same types of jobs. The private sector tends to create jobs that can increase the overall earnings for business owners, and USAID is probably engaged in work where there's not a direct profitability to be made, or there's no profitability in the business activities of a lot of those people, right? It's some of it was aid work. So, but that's okay. We can have fundamental misunderstandings, I guess, of finance and economics, so okay.
But that's an easy refutation. The real problem, of course, is the fact that he's abusing his platform to say that Asmongold should get a street meeting. And that's just kinda obviously not okay. Any rational, mature person understands why that's not okay. I really shouldn't have to explain it. I think there's certain things where if you have to explain it to someone, then it's a waste of time because the fact that they don't automatically understand it is proof that they are not capable of understanding it, no matter.
I think that it's a good world sometimes when you're worried about getting your ass beat, okay? I think that there is some social pressure that is good social pressure. You can't walk up to somebody and talk about how you'd want to, rape their mom or kill their children. You're probably going to get your ass whipped, okay? And I think to some extent that's okay. Some of this social pressure kind of keeps behavior in line. It kind of, dictates the standards by which we treat each other. You can't be totally unhinged publicly. I don't like that conservatives have reset the standards online and that they can act in some of the most deplorable subhuman ways possible and then turn around and cry civility politics when they're supporting stuff that is literally destroying people's lives. I wholly reject that. And I will continue to be unhinged about it because I think the normalization of all of this shit is fucking unreal. So
no matter how it is explained to them. And of course, the real problem here is that it's actually much worse. Because whether or not Destiny himself is just talking smack, and whether or not he himself would assault Asmongold in public is obviously irrelevant. The real problem here is, of course, that Destiny's videos get hundreds of thousands of views.
Oh no.
And therefore, it really only takes one emotionally unstable person hearing this to have a problem. Because obviously, most people watching this are not going to unironically...
The biggest issue, I don't know if people understand this, let me say this very clearly. The biggest issue with the people that cry civility politics is what they're doing is they think they're supporting, we'll do the leftist definitions here in a way. They think that they're supporting a nonviolent status quo. And that is a myth that needs to be absolutely and utterly crushed. They think that the status quo as it exists right now is perfectly okay because there is no violence, and that when somebody comes along and says something crazy, unhinged, like what Destiny said, that now all of a sudden it might get violent, right? But that's because they're refusing to engage with the status quo being incredibly violent. That's just inconceivable to them. Like, well, no, people are allowed to have a difference of opinions about things. The difference of opinions is whether or not somebody's getting deported from this country with no due process. That's not a simple matter of a difference in opinion. Inarguably, this is a violent action from the United States to forcibly remove somebody from their home and then deport them. But there's just it's this weird, cringe kind of status quo defense of the current situation is just not violent at all. And so when you say unhinged shit like this, you're making it violent.
They think that they now have a moral imperative to hunt down Asmongold and give him a street beating. In fact,
also to be clear, I'm not advocating, like at least in plain words, I'm not saying that like somebody should go and beat these people up. I guess the point that I wish that people would take is the system that you're taking part in right now is being this violent. This is the system that you are right now taking part in. It is more violent than my suggestion. Or I shouldn't say suggestion. More violent than me saying that somebody could beat your ass for saying shit like this publicly. But people just don't view it that way because it doesn't affect them.
That number is probably near zero. But then you also have to ask the question...
Like, it's so crazy to me that the same crowd that endlessly cries taxation is theft seems to be neutral when it comes to government deportations with no due process.
This are not going to unironically think that they now have a moral imperative to hunt down Asmongold and give him a street beating. In fact, that number is probably near zero. But then you also have to ask the question, just because it's near zero, does that mean it actually is zero? Because the thing is, most people, when we watch somebody...
this is the thing, maybe someday I'm going to lock myself in a room and I'm just going to try to come up with a snappier set of arguments because it's not immediately intuitively understandable. Somebody says, LOL, at Destiny. So it's fine now for anyone to talk about assaulting you on stream over pro-Israel takes because Israel is committing genocide. So like you're playing an interesting game here where, and it's kind of related to the fallacy, I think one that I was talking about yesterday. You're playing a clever game here where you're pretending that I'm advocating for something that would lead to a position. I did talk about this yesterday. That's different than the one you already have. Because anytime somebody says that, oh, so if you're going to say that, does that mean that somebody could kill you or beat you up for your pro-genocide takes? You're pretending like your position will become that if I have my position, rather than the truth, which is that's already your position. Right? Anybody that says, oh, well, if that's your position, then could somebody beat you up for being pro-genocide? Probably supported the October 7th attacks. So you're way past that position, but you're playing a game where you're pretending that my lack of civility is pushing you towards a lack of civility, when the reality is you're already past that position. You're just pretending not to be. You're trying to hold me hostage with a position that you've already committed yourself to. But yeah.
On the news, watching some pundits talk to each other, or what you're doing right now, watching somebody on YouTube for their political takes. I mean, you probably don't believe every single word we say, and you probably don't take everything we say serious. And that's a good thing. You shouldn't take everything we say seriously, because a lot of it is just banter. It's not even really meant to be taken seriously. In fact, a lot of it is just blood sports. You're just looking for something to be entertained by. However, the issue is there are a few people...
Just to be clear, I don't think you should engage, at least not right now, with politics, where it's just an LOL joking, something to be entertained by. I think that's a super, super, super bad way to engage with political discourse, but okay.
out there, a very small number, but there is that one guy who really does take everything he hears seriously. And this is something I've been again starting to think about as I get near to 100k subscribers. When you have an audience, you kind of have to respect that audience and take a little bit more responsibility for what you're saying. And since I've been thinking about this lately, I find it really bizarre and really sickening, really, that there are people out there with audiences 10 times, 100 times bigger than mine who aren't thinking about this at all, apparently. The subject just kind of somehow slips their mind. And the sad part is that's actually the good faith interpretation. The other possible interpretation of this is that they know exactly what they're doing. For example, in this case, maybe Destiny really does want somebody in his audience to assault Asmongold. That's obviously much, much, much worse. And that's what makes this such an important topic. That even the good faith interpretation of this is still very much a big yikers. They're either fully aware that what they're doing is inciting violence, or they're just being completely immature and irresponsible and completely lacking any sense of self-awareness around the fact that, hey, you kind of have an audience where you kind of tend to get hundreds of thousands of views. You know, maybe you should be aware of this fact and be a little less cringe. And of course, this isn't just a Destiny problem. I mean, we've seen this from a lot of other political content creators, like Voosh, for example.
As a Canadian, it kind of baffles me how people can say over and over that things will just be fine when things are clearly not just fine being like 2 months in. It just feels complacent. Yeah, like, we need to get militant and fast, okay? They're going to start, like, disappearing U.S. citizens. There are going to be bodies, like, washing up on the shore. They're going to build the camps. They're going to try to do everything they can. The whole thing is like a loot and burn experiment.
Yeah, pretty much self-explanatory. Again, even the good faith interpretation of this is that they just have no filter, no awareness, no respect for their audience. And this particular clip also kind of shows a really basic example of how stochastic terrorism tends to come with a bit of spice of fear-mongering behind it. We need to get militant because the other side is going to attack us and do bad things and disappear us in the streets. When in reality, that's probably not going to happen. So it just...
What's the date on this video? 1 day ago? Okay.
Just gets people riled up for nothing. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, I don't think there's really anything you can do to change certain people. Someone past a certain age who still behaves this way is probably going to be like that forever. Some people sometimes manage to learn this kind of thing and this kind of behavior past the age of 30 or so, but it's not usual. However, what we can do is try and at least fix the behavior to tone it down a bit. You probably won't get them to change internally, but there is a simple thing that the community needs to do to kind of tone this type of rhetoric down. And that is more people who are fans of that creator need to call them out on it. See, it's very easy for me, a right-leaning Mises-Hopian libertarian, to kind of call these trash libs out on their BS. I know that a lot of people who watch my content are the types of people who are already...
I love that it took, I don't even know what it took. I guess Trump too, and all the unhinged shit he's doing for conservatives to jump over to the feeling that stochastic terrorism is like a real thing. Like, now we're worried about this. Do you think this guy has any, like, even looking at that Easter message today, I think I said this literally in regards to the Easter thing. Do you think this guy has a video on, I'm really disappointed with how much Trump's rhetoric is unhinged. All the crazy stuff that he said. Today is Easter. It should be a holiday. We should all be celebrating and, you know, kind of like having more unity with each other. I don't know why Trump is being so divisive.
Fully aware that bread tubers in general are grifters and not even half as intelligent.
Oh, wait, he has a video on me about Trump derangement syndrome. Oh, boy.
As they want people to believe they are. And so in many ways, this is just expected, ridiculous, immature behavior from them that confirms this to be true. However, there's probably at least a few people out there watching this who are fans of Destiny, who are fans of Voosh. And what you need to realize is that you need to kind of hold your guy accountable. And I mean this for myself too. If I ever slip up and say something a little yikesy, I want the people who actually care about my content letting me know that. And so this is my message to any Destiny or Voosh fan who happen to click on this video because, hey, it's kind of including Destiny and Voosh. Y'all need to start holding your boy to a higher standard of ethics. A big reason why so many content creators do insane things like inciting violence is because they just kind of get away with it. They often only get criticism from the outside. But I think on the internet, within various communities, surrounding various people, or surrounding various influencers as they're called, even though I absolutely hate that word, you kind of have to hold people accountable from within. And because you don't do that, what ends up happening is that the stupid behavior continues. There's no punishment, there's no pushback, nothing. Especially when one of these ways to hold them accountable is actually very easy to do, and that's just to simply stop watching them for a bit. Which might not sound like anything, but it actually kind of is. You see, the way big tech algorithms work is that they tend to work on engagement. And unfortunately, big tech algorithms don't really know the difference between negative and positive engagement. And so what happens is that clout goblins, people who are seeking attention, seeking engagement, people who are trying to get their post thousands upon thousands of views, or someone who's already an established influencer, again, I hate that word, just trying to maintain the views that they normally get. There's a very perverted incentive out there right now in the way these algorithms operate, the kind of engagement farm by intentionally saying stupid things, intentionally posting rage bait, intentionally saying crazy stuff, because the way things really work, they'll get views over it. And this is something that's very important for everybody to understand, because if you find yourself getting recommended crappy things by the algorithm, that actually may simply be because you're interacting with crappy things too much. And so what happens is when you watch an immature man-child say something stupid and you comment on them and call out why what they're saying is stupid, the algorithm doesn't really see
a lot of my videos, damn.
much of a difference between that and you giving another video the thumbs up and commenting on them and saying why you liked what they said. And so you'll get recommended more of the garbage content that you didn't like. And this is actually another reason why calling out this kind of behavior from the outside doesn't really work, because the algorithm sees that, doesn't know the difference, and then starts recommending you more breadtube schlop because you want.
Just to be clear, the algorithms have gotten far more sophisticated in terms of the types of stuff they distinguish, and they do want you to have like positive, happy engagements with the content, because I think the companies have found that it is it provides for longer, better engagement, and it keeps people on the site longer. Not that that matters that much, but it used to be the case of like any comment is a good comment, and thumbs up and thumbs down both help. But I think now social media companies generally do look for more positive engagement with content.
Watched and responded to some other BreadTube slop. And yes, I actually do ruin the algorithm for myself when watching and refuting BreadTubers. In many ways, I watch them so that you don't have to. So yeah, my recommended feed is unfortunately filled to the brim with BreadBoy slop. It is what it is. And so that's one thing to remember.
So
if you see something that's stupid, click off the video, and if you can, right-click, don't recommend content. That's what you should really do when you're on the outside looking in. You may be tempted to reply to them. You may be tempted to watch their whole video, but for the sake of what the algorithm recommends you in the future, you really shouldn't. And again, it's a way to hold people accountable for saying absurd things. Because as long as it gives them clout, they're going to do it. This is just kind of the unfortunate reality of how the internet works these days. There are generally two kinds of people who tend to gain a generally large following.
Your mom
people who make
and
content that people are genuinely interested in, genuinely enjoy, and people who rage farm the algorithm with cringe. There are, of course, people who are in the middle of this, people who make content that some people enjoy, but then pad their numbers a bit by also posting a bit of cringe. But generally, that's kind of how it works. You can either make it by making good content, or you can make it by making deranged content. There you go.
Good content is political content that I agree with, and deranged content is political content that I disagree with. Fucking own it. Own it.
Defy the algorithm for those of you who are wondering how it works. That is legitimately the TLDR. And unfortunately, it's also not just YouTube.
True! MGL Santos, Destiny, we live in a world where you have groups of people that say that an online personality needs to have more responsibility than the president of the most powerful nation. That's absolutely true. From now on, my standard of speech is going to be at the most whatever Trump's standard is. Okay? So if Trump is allowed to say crazy shit like, he who saves his country violates no law, I'm allowed to say that shit. I refuse to live in a world where I have more accountability for my audience than the president of the United States has. That's fucking crazy.
This kind of thing also exists on places like Twitter, or again, X as it's now called. This is another thing that, going back to Destiny, he does this all the time, I've noticed. A lot of his takes on X are very obviously deliberately designed to be a little bit inflammatory. It's very obviously just virtue signaling to his audience.
Like, look at him saying this. This is meant to be inflammatory. Glad to know all those Second Amendment guys meant fuck off with these traitors. I'm being inflammatory, right? I'm literally just quoting a Trump joke.
Hillary wants to essentially abolish the Second Amendment. By the way, and if she gets to pick her judges, nothing you can do, folks. Although the Second Amendment people, maybe there is, I don't know. But I'll tell you what.
I'm quoting a Trump joke. I have greater responsibility to my audience than Trump does to the United States of America? What?
His takes on X are very obviously deliberately designed to be a little bit inflammatory. It's very obviously just virtue signaling to his audience, but at the same time saying things that are wrong in ways that will irritate the people who don't agree with him just enough so that they'll reply to him. And again, admittedly, I often reply to breadboys and explain why they're wrong. But again,
You know, I'm going to be honest, and I would be very, very, very afraid of doing this, so I don't know if I would do this. Ooh, but maybe I would consider debating this guy if he really wanted to, although I think I would get crushed. I think I would be absolutely fucking annihilated. But if this guy ever wanted to argue about the contents of this video, you know, we could maybe do it.
I kind of do it so that you don't have to. It's more useful for just one person to point out why they're wrong, and then ratio off that one person if you must, than having hundreds of people reply to them. Because when you do that, when you dogpile someone, you're actually just kind of helping them. A lot of times when you see people who are, again, quote-unquote influencers complaining about them being harassed, they're actually lying. They don't mind it at all. They love the dogpiling because they're getting more views. They get more followers out of it. Because, of course, these recommendations from the algorithm are all based on an AI algorithm that recommends based entirely on engagement. Which then brings us to kind of the second thing you can do, which is that people in general need to kind of push back on big tech for the way the algorithm currently works. And this is one of those things where one or two people doing it, it's not going going to make any difference. But if enough people do it in ways that big tech starts being afraid that they might lose money if they don't finally cave in and fix it, they'll eventually have to reconsider how the algorithm currently works. So when you see things like surveys asking you about how you feel about the algorithm coming from any of these big tech companies, you actually should let them know that you don't like negative engagement. And the thing is, people have actually been doing this, and it is kind of starting to work. We've even gotten it to the point where we've actually even got people like Elon Musk commenting on it, and at least acknowledging that the problem exists. So you kind of need to make your voice heard and let big tech know that negative engagement isn't actually something we want. And the thing is, this particular subject, the subject of cringe lords who advocate for political violence, is actually a really particularly good subject to help put some pressure and weight on that. Because another big problem with the algorithm is specifically in regards to big tech censorship. The way censorship currently works in a lot of big tech sites is that they censor and shadow ban based on how politically correct your opinions are, aka how much you agree with the establishment. And this is actually partially responsible for how RedTube managed to gain a foothold. It's how a lot of these guys became popular. Because the main difference with a RedTuber is that they generally tend to have, well, correct opinions. And so they, whether intentionally or not, kind of jumped into an algorithmic blind spot. Because while saying very deranged things and farming negative engagement while also holding correct opinions, well, guess what? That's a huge algorithm boost. This is why you might notice that people who have an audience and don't have correct opinions, they tend to have a higher standard of behavior and a higher standard of maturity. And it's not so much that that kind of behavior gives them an algorithmic boost. It's more like they'll just get shadow banned if they don't, while on the other...
I wish there was a way to talk about, in a way that's more kind of like viscerally understandable, I wish there was a way to talk about, God, I sound so cringe saying this, but like structural or systemic violence and how people can gaslight the fuck out of you when it comes to responding to that violence. So for instance, it wouldn't surprise me if over the next 4 years, the left was more violent than the right. Right? That wouldn't surprise me. But that's because right now the right is enacting unprecedented forms of state-sanctioned violence, right? And if it was the case that you had a way to enact certain types of violence on people, basically sanctioned by the state, then it's not surprising that those people, those same people, would react in a way where they're like, hey, we're gonna be violent back. But for some reason, that the kind of like the state-sanctioned violence doesn't really hit the same way, and it kind of just looks like the violence from the other side is coming from nowhere. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like, I wish there was an easier way to say something like that, Like in, if I were to go to some place and take, round up 100 black people and force them to work on some fucking plantation, but I didn't necessarily hit any of them or beat any of them, and then they started attacking back at me, and I'd be like, wow, you guys are so fucking violent. What's going on? I have this, like, status quo systemic bias that favors me and allows me to say things like, look at how violent these guys are being. It's unhinged. What the fuck is wrong with these dudes? Right? And I'm kind of always got like this weird moral high ground as a result of it. It's very fucking annoying, but...
On the other hand, breadpoids can say whatever crazy, aggressive things they want and still get millions of impressions. However, fortunately, recently...
Man, you really put me up there with Hassan.
This seems to be changing because people are already kind of complaining about this. But there's still, unfortunately, a lot of work to do. The algorithms in big tech, unfortunately, still kind of work like this. They've gotten better. They've gotten tweaked a little bit since 2017 to just a couple of years ago, but it's still very much not good. A lot of people have kind of gotten complacent about this. A lot of people are thinking, oh, hey, Elon Musk owns X now, and he exposed the algorithms for being cringe and rigged. Everything's good now. No, unfortunately, that is just not true. The algorithm still sucks. It still very much rewards people for being a bully while wearing the mask of political correctness.
Oh, no.
And you can tell this because the people who act aggressive and behave like this still have massive audiences, which is annoying and unfortunate because the way shadow banning should work in an ideal and more just society is that shadow banning should be used instead of a way of censorship, should be used against people who try to abuse the algorithm and try to farm negative engagement. It shouldn't be a thing, but unfortunately it is, and it still is. And we can see evidence of this just by looking at recent happenings. For instance, Hassan Abbey got banned from Twitch for 3 days. And you might first hear that and think, okay, great, Twitch is finally holding some of their big streamers accountable. But of course, if you know Hassan Abbey and you know the kind of rhetoric that he tends to have, you know that that's actually just a massive slap on the wrist. Hassan Abbey has been outright, flat out supporting Hamas terrorists for quite some time now. And so a 3-day suspension is really nothing. And this is of course because Hassan Abbey's opinions are very much within the political correct sphere. The kind of socialist light, breadtube schlop, trash lib opinions that tend to make our decadent elites clap and gurgle and hork. And so you can see that they still get away with it. I mean, let's just be honest for a moment. If a right-wing content creator out there said anything even remotely close to 1% as anti-Semitic as Hamas Abbey has said.
Also, listen, I'm going to agree with you. This might have been true several years ago, or especially at the height of COVID, that there was more political pressure to, I don't want to say censor, but to, in a way, censor like voices on the right, for sure, for a variety of reasons. Some good, I would say, and some bad. While that might be true, are we ever going to update our assumptions about the world? Like, why do we keep pretending that that's the same world that we live in right now? That's clearly not the world we live in right now, right? Elon Musk owns Twitter. Like, are you ever going to stop crying about this perceived oppression?
Heck, probably even 0.1%. We all know that they would get their channel yeeted into the sun. The moderators of big tech would shadow ban and demonetize that content so hard that it would never organically be seen again.
All of these moderators of big tech are all massive Trump dick sucks now. Are we never going to update our priors about that, or we're never going to talk about that, or?
But again, because Hasnabi has correct trademark opinions trademark, he's allowed to be deranged and only get a slap on the wrist. Thus proving that, yes, the algorithm still sucks. And so we see that being aggressively PC is still very much a way to get a free pass in the world of social media today. And one of the things we can kind of also see from this is that, well, a lot of journos behave this way too. See, unfortunately, violent rhetoric we see from breadtoids is really just coming from the top down. Because unfortunately, a lot of corporate statist journos do the same thing. They tend to be a little bit smarter about it than breadtoids. I mean, after all, they're hired generally entirely based on their ability to spin things and say certain things without outright saying it. In fact, journos can often be very sly and crafty in how they do this. For example, look at this New York Times article right here. Can voters be held accountable for their candidates' behavior? Or shouldn't Trump voters be viewed as traitors depending on when you're looking at it in the Internet Archive? Now, the article itself eventually concludes that no, you can't really hold voters accountable for—
Don't you think this violence you talked about is similar to Israel-Palestine? Maybe? I would need a more specific question, but
the behavior of those who they voted for. Which of course makes sense because one of the basic flaws of democracy is that candidates don't actually have to do what they were voted in office to do. They can go in a completely different direction once they're in office. And of course everybody who's well informed on candidates knows that democracy really is often just choosing who's the lesser evil. Voting for—
oh my god. How is that a flaw in democracy? What, that the candidate could just do other things? I think that's just a flaw in human free will. Like, complain to God.
a candidate doesn't automatically mean you agree with everything that candidate says that they're going to do. And that's kind of the problem here. It's a stupid question that doesn't even need to be asked. So why are they entertaining it? Well, because engagement farming. You see, it's not actually
It's
obvious.
a stupid question to ask if voters can be held accountable for who they vote for?
Choosing who's the lesser evil. Voting for a candidate doesn't automatically mean you agree with everything that candidate says that they're going to do. And that's kind of the problem here. It's a stupid question that doesn't even need to be asked. So why are they entertaining it? Well, because engagement farming. You see, it's not actually obvious that they're against this kind of thinking until halfway through the article. And so it's entirely clickbait. A more responsible and more honest way of titling this article would be why voters should not be held accountable for their candidate's behavior, instead of this clickbaity headline and clip art that suggests the opposite. But of course, journals have to chase that clickbait. And plus, they know that a lot of people don't actually read articles. A lot of people just read headlines and then infer based on those headlines.
Wow.
The result of this is that a lot of people will walk away from this article thinking that political violence is still okay. Typical journo behavior. But on the other hand, sometimes journos are a little bit more obvious about
Journos.
things, although it's still in ways that are very manipulative.
Do you think they intentionally lifted this like slang from fucking like is it like cyberpunk? Not like the cyberpunk video game, but like that world or whatever, like corpos and journos. Is that where this comes from?
A big one I recall being that assassination plot against Brett Kavanaugh, which just kind of shows the seriousness of the issue. Again, all it takes is one deranged person. If you're feeding nonsense to millions of people, eventually it's going to be a problem. And there's really no way you can't know that. Now, for those of you who forgot, since the story was largely buried, Kavanaugh was a court pick who was largely the subject of a pretty big, stereotypical witch hunt. I very distinctly remember the whole Christine Blasey Ford scenario, where he was randomly accused of sexual assault just as he's about to be confirmed to the Supreme Court. And the problem with this is that the media treated the case like it was completely true without any evidence whatsoever, and just fed fear-mongering article after fear-mongering article that some wicked, evil, bad, evil, straight white male is about to be on the court. That was the NPC talking point in the day. Kavanaugh bad. And the issue, of course, is that the case was a load of BS. No, seriously, I've actually considered making a video on the Christine Blasey Ford accusations. I consider myself fairly good at knowing when someone's full of it, and one thing that just about no pundit was willing to say was that Ford was probably lying. Her accusations specifically only included information that could not be falsified. No date range, because if she gave a date range, then it could have been falsified by pointing out that he was somewhere else at the time. No real location, because then it could be falsified by proving that he was never there. No specific details whatsoever. If you wanted to deliberately—
I didn't follow the details though, so I can't prove or disprove anything you're saying, so.
craft a bogus case that was deliberately designed to waste people's time, the Ford case is exactly what you would want to make.
Wow.
Mainly because sexual assault is one of those things that people automatically kind of have an emotional attachment to. It immediately gets people's gears grinding. And as a result, people kind of turn their brain off when they hear it, which makes it the perfect go-to bogus accusation for when you want to smear somebody and get the public on your side. Because ordinarily, any other crime that has no time, no place, zero information other than who's being accused—
like all of the Hunter Biden stuff?
everyone would consider that bogus. For instance, if your local mayor got accused by someone of stealing something, and that person couldn't say what was stolen, how it was stolen, when it was stolen, where it was stolen, the accusation was just, yeah, Mayor X stole something from me. No, I don't remember any other details. Then absolutely no rational person would be taking that seriously. Now, sexual assault is a very serious, very horrible crime. It's one of the worst things you can do to a person. But people really need to stop turning their brain off when it comes to this one specific crime. Because I've noticed that people afford a completely ridiculously low standard of evidence when it comes to it. And as a result of that, whenever the elites have someone that they don't like and they want to smear, for whatever reason, it's always the go-to false accusation, because they know that it's a specific type of accusation that is known to emotionally manipulate the masses into immediately assuming a guilty until proven innocent mindset, while completely ignoring the fact that the details of the accusation are completely and utterly patently absurd. And of course, it's a perfect avenue for stochastic terrorism from our mainstream corporate statist media. Because if you remember the Kavanaugh case and the rhetoric surrounding it, you may also remember that all the partisan hack journals came out of the closet and published hit piece after hit piece after hit piece, all asserting that Kavanaugh was definitely guilty, despite the fact again that they had absolutely no evidence whatsoever. And that is absolutely a form of stochastic terrorism. Sure, most of these articles didn't actually suggest that anybody should give Kavanaugh some street justice, but the sheer magnitude of hack journals conspiring—
as in, Israel uses the status quo and any fight back looks crazy from Palestine because Israel is using systemic violence. If that is an exact take that you have, yeah, I would agree with that 1,000,000,000%, of course. Israel, but I've said that 1,000,000,000,000 times, so I don't even know why you're asking me that. I've said 1,000,000,000,000 times that Israel prefers the status quo because the status quo allows Israel to continue to expand into the West Bank and deprive the Palestinians of any kind of, even having a representation of forming any kind of state.
to publish all of these hit pieces from various platforms gives a false implication that a very guilty person is being unjustly sworn into the Supreme Court. And of course, it came with the fear-mongering that Kavanaugh was going to take all of the women's rights away, thus painting Kavanaugh as if he's some kind of Marvel supervillain. And that is not responsible journalism. That is the kind of stupid rhetoric that will lead an emotionally unstable person to try and carry out some form of assassination plot. And it's unfortunate because this kind of crap leads to political violence all the time, like the Donald Trump assassination attempts. Both cases involved an emotionally unstable person being radicalized by nonsensical rhetoric. And here's the thing.
How do we know who they were radicalized by? Excuse me? Oh, I'm sorry. We're just going to assume it was the left wing. Okay. Based.
Thing that a lot of people don't realize. The reason why our mainstream status media behaves this way is actually very similar to the reason why many influencers or content creators or whatever you want to call them also often post cringe. The reason of engagement bait. Trying to get people's attention with emotionally charged nonsense is not a new grift at all. It's just an old grift that has been adapted to the current technology. Get people riled up so that they'll give you attention. And that's what we're really seeing here is this engagement farmer to stochastic terrorist pipeline of sorts. Wow. It's really just the logical conclusion of how things currently work. Because we don't really have any good standards of behavior or ethics, being an aggressive demagogue is thus an effective strategy to gain relevance. It's a strategy of riling people up, rallying the crowd, and getting them to look at you, thus farming ad revenue and gaining subscribers, etc., etc. Whether it's an online influencer or a journal publication, the issue here is the same, which then just immediately brings up the question, what the heck can we actually do about this? Well, aside from you just personally not giving them attention and not giving your engagement like I recommended earlier, there's some other things we can do. The first of these is realizing that we aren't delegitimizing bad journos enough. A lot of us think that we are, but we're not. There really isn't enough of an intellectual delegitimization force on the internet these days. Not enough to counter the amount of BS that's out there. In fact, this is a big reason why I started my channel in the first place. There's just so many bad narratives that are designed to either distract people or take advantage of people's emotions, steering people to think and behave in ways that are based on things that are not true.
Hell
because
yes.
the complete lack of ethical standards in both journalism and content creation results in the problem of everyone doing it. And at least in my case, I realized I can't really just sit around and hope for somebody to do something about it. Because while there's some of us calling them out for their dishonesty and calling them out for how dangerous their rhetoric really gets, the reality is it's still not enough. The disdain I see for the lack of ethics in content creation these days is really only maybe 1% of what it really should be. Because what we really need to see is a formation of intellectual think tanks that are specifically designed and built from the ground up on the principle of delegitimizing this type of rhetoric as their main goal. Because the amount of influencers and journalist publications out there that have abused their platform and abused their credibility is still just insanely high. And of course, if you go to places like Wikipedia, you'll see that a lot of these outlets still are treated as reliable sources, which is ridiculous because they're absolutely not reliable at all.
Come on,
another solution that a lot of
Wikipedia.
people don't really think about is being more supportive of things like school choice, and specifically is taking a stand against the way our education system currently works. Because this problem really, admittedly, is a much deeper, much difficult to fix foundational problem. At its core, the problem is that people aren't taught to think for themselves as they're growing up. State public education, and pretty much all of the modern world, still very much follows the Peruvian model of education, which is not actually designed to be an education system at all. It's designed to be a brainwashing system. It's designed to raise people to be obedient to schedules and to not think for themselves. And so, of course, it's only natural that most people grow up having no idea how to avoid being brainwashed. And so it's only natural that a huge number of people are just kind of okay with the fact that high engagement content is also often content that is designed to emotionally manipulate them. It's almost like Western society kind of has Stockholm syndrome in a way, where the average pleb has been brainwashed so hard and their mind has been fried by the algorithm so hard that they've actually grown to love being brainwashed, which is kind of funny, but at the same time, it's also kind of disturbing when you realize just how insanely massive this problem is.
Jesus.
And unfortunately, it's not really going to get better until people start moving away from the system. And before that can happen, of course, people need to be aware of the problem. But as for what you can do as an individual just to help yourself out right now, well, first off, just right away, you can stop watching deranged man-children who spew violent rhetoric. That will at least reduce the chances of you seeing it further in your recommended feed. And also, if you know that you're a relatively intelligent individual, consider contributing to the delegitimization strategy I mentioned earlier. And lastly, people just need to be aware of the fact of how easy it is for them to be emotionally manipulated, and stop giving attention to those who try to do it to you. Because the reality is, when you give them that attention, you're giving them authority. When people see an aggressive bread toy who gets hundreds of thousands of views and has hundreds of thousands of subscribers, people assume that, hey, this channel gets a lot of traction, therefore it must be trustworthy. And people need to realize that that is just 100% not true at all. The reality is, a lot of content creators and social media influencers, again, are just complete dunderheads. A lot of them gain an audience by simply appealing to emotions, or by appealing to midwits by parroting politically correct narratives. And of course, often with a sprinkling of the kind of deranged rhetoric that leads to political violence in the real world. It is a problem that will continue happening until we start holding people accountable to a higher standard of ethics, and more people become aware of just how easy it is for them to be.
How can one man drop so many
to say
truth bombs?
Thanks for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and all that good algorithm stuff. And if you want to support my content, you can do so on Subscribestar, Ko-Fi, or by buying some merch, or again by checking out Ground News. Thanks again. That is all. Till next time.
Okay. Let's get a real truth bomb. Since this guy is such a good truth sayer.
First off, this is another self-sponsored video by a sale on my merch store. I'm putting all the Taxation is Theft gear on a temporary limited time sale, and this allows you to both support my channel and trigger...
Most people are drowning in their delusional ignorance without knowing that their suffering was created by themselves. Wow.
Unless you've been living... Hey, internets. So you may have heard of something known as Trump derangement syndrome, because unless you've been living under a rock since the last week, you may have noticed that Trump has actually been inaugurated, and he is, in fact, the official president now. Which, aside from that meaning that he's just signed a bunch of executive orders that undid a lot of what the Biden presidency did, and all the other things that have been happening recently, what it really means is that we are about to see a lot more TDS than we normally see. I imagine much of mainstream journalists will return to a state of TDS. I imagine that a lot of what RedTube's content will look like will just be 4 years of TDS. Basically, we're going to see a lot of TDS and a lot of people talking about TDS. And the issue with that is that a lot of people talk about TDS or show signs of TDS with nobody knowing what TDS actually is. And that's what this video is going to remedy.
Yes, finally, let's talk about it. So, ever run into a pesky piece of shit who seems to be destroying every single thing the Trump admin is doing with facts and logic? Well, now we've created a clever shortcut called TDS, so that every single time somebody gives a criticism against dear leader Donald Trump, you can easily dismiss every single thing they say by simply calling them deranged. LOL.
Help everybody out in understanding the next 4 years of political discourse by going over what the diagnostic criteria for Trump derangement syndrome are and how the disease actually presents itself. Because a lot of people may know how to spot TDS on the surface, but not really fully understand just what exactly is going on inside these people's heads. Because it's actually kind of interesting. It's not just funny, it's actually quite fascinating how the rusty cogwheels in these people's brains churns, and the absurd lengths that they will go to accidentally humiliate themselves. But also, aside from being kind of funny, it's important to be able to spot Trump derangement syndrome in the wild, because it's also a way to detect bad takes. So knowing how to spot TDS can also save you a lot of time, because it lets you know which journalists out there aren't really worth paying any attention to. As they have unfortunately come down with this very horrible disease that tends to cause people to completely lose their minds. So first off, what exactly is Trump derangement syndrome? What exactly can we consider the diagnostic criteria for it? And what about it specifically differentiates itself from simply disliking Donald Trump? Well, the first and most important component is bad faith. This is the main symptom of TDS required for a diagnosis. When someone has TDS, everything that Donald Trump says or does is interpreted by them in the most utterly insane and unhinged bad faith light imaginable. Whenever somebody says or does something, it can always be interpreted in many different ways. For example, if someone says the phrase, "I hate waffles," there are many ways to interpret that. The realistic and most likely interpretation is that they just don't like to eat waffles. But it's also possible for someone to analyze that statement further and extrapolate a lot of things from it that may or may not make a whole lot of sense. For example, a bad faith interpretation of it is that when they say, "I hate waffles," what they really mean is that they hate Waffle House. And then they may commit a further leap in logic where they assert that because they hate Waffle House, they then go by the association of it with African American culture to say that they must be racist against black people, all from the statement, "I hate waffles." That would be
I'm so sorry, and I just might not know. I thought that the stereotype for Waffle House was white trash, not African Americans. Am I crazy? Or maybe he's just using this as an example and just happened to use the exact opposite. You're wrong. Why not both? It's a crossroads. It's just Southern, no? Okay.
An example of an insane bad faith leap in logic. It doesn't really make much sense. It's very unlikely that someone who says they hate waffles is racist against black people. It is extremely and ridiculously unlikely that that is the case. But it doesn't matter, because if a person is willing to be bad faith and intentionally interpret words in bad faith, they can absolutely draw those conclusions by virtue of the fact that they can argue it. Of course, the arguments don't necessarily need to make sense. In fact, they're usually fallacious and usually nonsensical. And going back to Trump derangement syndrome, that's what it really means by bad faith interpretations. Insane, unhinged bad faith interpretations of everything Trump says and does. Rather than trying to understand what Trump is actually saying or actually trying to do or what he really means, the person who suffers from TDS will always engage in the most bizarre leaps of logic in order to find the most unhinged interpretation of what Trump has done.
Wait, what am I interpreting incorrectly here? Trump says he is conditioning aid to California following LA wildfires. That was impeachable. By the way, there's like 20 different things that Trump has done that is impeachable. Donald Trump playing politics, playing political games with FEMA funds is fucking disgusting, okay? It's absolutely fucking disgusting. He did it in his first term, and he continued to do it into his second term. It's gross. But all I did here was make an assassination joke, so I don't even know what this has to do with interpreting him incorrectly, but okay.
Done. And the best way to understand this is by looking at some examples. A recent one being this interesting little take about how Trump is going to have the U.S. military invade and annex Greenland. Various breadtubers were saying it, for instance, Counterpoints, "Thank God Joe Rogan and Andrew Tate prepared Gen Z alpha males to die in battle for the annexation of Greenland." Or this guy, Dean Withers, "FYI, Trump literally said he might invade Greenland." And it's not just some weirdos on Twitter. It also, strangely enough, appeared in the mainstream media, NBC News. Trump suggests he could use military force to acquire Panama Canal and Greenland, and economic force to annex Canada. And yet, when you look at the actual conversation, it quickly reveals itself to be a steaming load. What Trump actually stated is that he wants the United States to purchase Greenland. And then someone asked him if he would rule out the military. And the thing is, Trump being Trump, he of course didn't rule it out, because Trump...
Oh! Trump being Trump! I forgot it was just Trump being Trump. My bad. Oh, why don't we ever talk about TDSS, which is Trump dick suck syndrome, which is where every single unhinged statement Donald Trump makes can be excused through some leap of faith that he's just saying random memes, except when he's not. When Trump talked about tariffing the entire world, that was just a joke until it wasn't. When Trump talked about renegotiating borders with Canada or annexing Greenland or whatever for the Panama Canal, that was a joke until it wasn't for Panama. But okay, good one.
Trump doesn't rule anything out. This has been a consistent thing with Trump, a silly thing with Trump, and kind of a dumb thing with Trump, because it's something that tends to bait people a lot. But when you ask Trump if he would rule something out, he usually doesn't say that he'll rule it out. And knowing that, it becomes very, very unlikely that
Except that's not true, because when you talk about him, will you do a strong thing against Russia, or, what was the particular statements? It had to do with, like, are we going to apply pressure to Russia or something? And he was like, no, Russia's got the upper hand, so it's Ukraine that has to, figure out what a peace deal looks like, or it's Ukraine, the onus is on Ukraine to do this. He has no problem with some people saying that, he's not going to put pressure on them. It's up to the other party. But then with other people, he'll say, oh no, I've never taken anything off the table. That's bullshit. Everybody knows it's bullshit. This is a Trump derangement syndrome argument. I don't think this guy, I don't know how far along the Trump derangement line this guy is for the brainwashing. If he genuinely believes what he's saying right now, or if he's just like working the propaganda angle.
You're actually going to see a military operation from the United States invading and annexing Greenland. The reasonable interpretation is that Trump will most likely just try to purchase it from Denmark, which later, when Trump actually talked on the phone with them, we found out that's exactly what he really wants to do. There's not...
Except that's not, I believe, what the Danish PM said. I thought the Danish prime minister expressed great concern because after the phone call, Trump still wouldn't take the military shit off the table. NATO ally utterly freaked out after Donald Trump call. Report, President Donald Trump had a fiery phone call with Denmark's prime minister last week, putting the NATO ally into crisis mode, the FT reported, citing officials briefed on the matter. European officials told the FT the call did not go well and that Trump was aggressive and confrontational with his Danish counterpart. So I don't know where he's getting this, but okay. What was the date of this? January 29th, so this was already out by the time he said this. His articles are 25th.
Trump will most likely just try to purchase it from Denmark, which later, when Trump actually talked on the phone with them, we found out that's exactly what he really wants to do. There's not going to be a military invasion to steal Greenland by force. That's ridiculous. That's obviously not going to happen. It's pretty obvious that Trump is just puffing up a marketing ploy to, try and buy it. And when you take a...
What? That doesn't even make sense. Like, just think about... You can say anything, and then it's a marketing ploy. Like... I don't understand how you can get away with this. And their audiences don't look at them like, bro, isn't that kind of fucking retarded? Like... Hey, I found a way to make my employees work harder. Oh, really? What are you doing? Basically, what I did is anytime I catch somebody on the clock, that's like slacking off, what I do is I abduct their family members and subject them to genital torture. And then I send them a video of their family members being tortured. Wait, bro, that sounds incredibly fucking unhinged. Yeah, that would be. I just say shit like that. I just say shit like that just to see, because it's just like a thing. It gets them to kind of work harder. Like, I wouldn't actually do it, but there is no other area of your life. There is no other arena in the world where somebody can make an unhinged statement, but it's okay because it's marketing? What the fuck are we talking? Walk me through the plan here. Why would Trump say this? Walk me through the plan. What is this supposed to do?
Ridiculous. That's obviously not going to happen. It's pretty obvious that Trump is just puffing up a marketing ploy to,
what's the marketing ploy? What?
Try and buy it. And when you take a step back and just try to exist in reality for a moment, it's pretty obvious that that's the case. And journalists have kind of gone back on this and asked Trump to clarify again by asking him simple loaded questions such as, would you rule out military or economic coercion? Which of course Trump won't rule out, especially since they said military or economic, which actually includes a lot of things to rule out. But then journalists...
You understand that you can respond with a full sentence. Why is this guy pretending like Donald Trump would reasonably rule out? Like he got tricked by the grammar? The grammar police showed up and tricked him into not being able to answer a question coherently?
Let's report it as only saying that he didn't rule out the military. They conveniently leave out the part of the conversation where they were also having an either-or factor in there in regards to economic methods. And this is where we can kind of identify one of the...
Oh no, not the either-or trap. Oh no.
Main causes of TDS, which is mainstream media sensationalism. Whenever Trump says something that can be interpreted in a weird way, often the media will intentionally interpret it in that way just so that they can get a clickbait title out of it, which is just another way of how the bad faith operates. A lot of times, bad faith interpretations come from intentionally taking things out of context or leaving things out of the conversation in order to make it seem like their bad faith interpretation isn't as crazy as it actually is. And what's interesting is that this tends to come in stages. So for instance, stage 0 of Trump derangement syndrome would be simply disliking or hating Donald Trump. However, at this stage, TDS isn't really apparent. They aren't necessarily guaranteed to move on to stage 1. It's just the beginning requirement to get TDS. But then you reach stage 1 of TDS. That's where the bad faith arguments and bad faith interpretations start to come to a boil. The difference here being that someone at stage 0, aka someone who doesn't have TDS but could get TDS if they aren't careful, is that stage 1, once TDS is actually started, people begin to ignore reality. And I think the best way to see some stage 1 content is to go all the way back to 2016 and reread some journalist takes about why Donald Trump was certainly not going to win. There was an interesting kind of journo obsession at the time, kind of trip over themselves.
Our example of TDS is people thinking that Donald Trump couldn't win. You understand that that was everybody, right? That was the left and the right. That wasn't just the right. Or maybe, well, he'd probably say, because it was establishment Republicans, he'd probably say, well, they all had Trump derangement syndrome as well. It could just be that it was a very new candidate and nobody had seen that type of politicking before. I think there are good reasons to assume or to imagine why a person like that could never win an election, but okay.
The competition of one-upping each other on how the latest silly thing Trump did means that there's no way he can win the election. Or in some cases, it just manifested as bad polling, like Bloomberg claiming that Clinton had a 12-point edge over Trump. And today, it's easy to look back at that and laugh because of how obviously wrong they were. But on a serious note, it also shows you the kind of beginning stage of TDS. And that's kind of how the bad faith starts to manifest. You see that they are obsessed with Donald Trump, but they refuse to try and seriously understand where the man is coming from. There's no...
You just said that we can't seriously understand him because he might just say shit that's a fucking meme. How are we supposed to understand that? How do you make sense of that?
Serious effort to understand Trump or understand his supporters. It's all fake, all surface level. There's no real attempt to understand the man anymore. Their dislike of Trump has overwritten their ability to understand Trump. That is the basic essence of where Trump derangement syndrome starts. And we saw a repeat of it recently. For example, this wonderful tweet from Destiny. Trump is the only candidate on stage who was called to suspend the Constitution. Oh my, did Trump actually want to do that? Such dangerous anti-American rhetoric. And then of course when you go and read what Donald Trump actually said, it reveals itself to not quite be that. It was just Donald Trump accusing the 2020 election of being fraud, something we...
A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules and regulations and articles, even those found in the Constitution. He literally said it verbatim. And I can't say that I'm worried about a thing that he said verbatim. And by the way, he basically has said in more ways than one that parts of the Constitution aren't valid. But what, like, how much of a dick suck do you have to be that you're getting ass pained when somebody is upset about a thing that your daddy actually said? It's so unfair that Destiny is criticizing Trump. He has derangement because he's doesn't like a thing that Trump actually said. Like, hello?
Actually said, it reveals itself to not quite be that. It was just Donald Trump accusing the 2020 election of being fraud, something we all know that he said, and him saying that the rules and regulations getting in the way of that being investigated should be cut out, interpreting that as completely and permanently suspending. What do you think? You're softening it a little bit. You're being a little bit euphemistic, but you're saying essentially the same thing. And him saying that the rules and regulations getting in the way of that being investigated should be cut out. Interpreting that as completely and permanently suspending the Constitution is...
If you can suspend a rule sometimes, you can suspend a rule all the time. That's how rule sets work. You can't selectively apply them. Once you've done that, you've lost the rule set. It doesn't apply anymore. It doesn't work anymore.
A very absurd, bad faith way to look at it. The more realistic understanding is that Donald Trump wanted to cut all red tape in regards to investigating the 2020 election. And then going back further to examine this tweet from Destiny, why is he quoting Elon Musk about Trump vetoing any national abortion ban? There's absolutely no relation to the post in the context, which means this is also a pretty good example of where stage 2 of Trump derangement syndrome is leading to, which is that people suffering from TDS for a long enough period...
Trump is the only candidate on stage who is called to suspend the Constitution. Anti-American, unpatriotic losers who worship a cult leader more than they respect our country will excuse this because they put Trump before country, family, and God. True!
At times start to show signs of manic obsession. Not only is everything Trump doing and saying interpreted in bizarre bad faith manners, but they also feel the need to bring it up in random cases and random contexts where what they're saying has absolutely nothing to do with the context.
Oh, also, by the way, God bless Joe Biden. Trump was fuming a few days ago, by the way.
My doctor gave me breast treatment.
Making everybody's life miserable.
Nice video.
Donald Trump's turn to fascism was, up until this point, missing one.
Because they were
whine about it. Take a look.
Whoever operated the autoped was really the president, because I don't know. But Biden gave them all their freedom because they were dead. I mean, they literally, and you know how they announced it? It was like a little sentence in a document that nobody saw but me and a couple of others. Mm-hmm. It said, for the sake of clarity, we have decided to destroy all documents, destroy and delete all documents. Could you imagine if I deleted and destroyed all documents from, and this is a hearing, a big deal.
Like the signal
that was set up that shouldn't have been allowed to go forward. And that's it. Yeah. So we can't even go after them because they were pardoned.
Based. Absolutely fucking based. Absolutely fucking based. Good job, Biden. Fuck this piece of shit Trump. This fashy fuck.
Weak.
Good pardon. Get fucked. Biden pardoned everybody that worked on the J6 committee out of fears that Donald Trump would try to go after all of them. He'd stick the DOJ on them. What a god. What a god. What a god.
conversation at hand. And the stage of obsession is also where they start to begin this kind of single-minded focus on certain things about Trump they don't like. So for example, we can do a search on the OmniLiberal about Trump January 6th, and we find post after post after post of him absolutely obsessing over trying to convince people that the January 6th Capitol riot was an unironic attempt to overthrow.
This is a really popular new online thing. I think it was mainly started in the online world. Hassan does it, all the snarker communities do it, where if you talk about a thing and they don't really have much that they can say about it, or they don't have a good counter for it, they just call you obsessed. And it's a way to say that, like, you can't criticize a thing or talk about a thing, because if you do, you're obsessed over it. Like, okay.
Throw the United States government. And I mean, just look at all the posts about this. This is not healthy. Or for a mainstream media example, CNN.
Like, this isn't healthy? This is my job, motherfucker. What are you talking about? I get paid to do this shit. What?
The basic summary of how Donald Trump was covered from the perspective of CNN can be seen as Orange Man bad, Orange Man very bad, Orange Man say bad thing, Orange Man do bad thing, over and over and over again, like it's the entire purpose of their network to say that Orange Man is bad and convince everybody that Orange Man is bad. You can almost be forgiven at points for forgetting that CNN is supposed to be a news network, because honestly, for a while there, it appeared as they had become the Orange Man bad network. Because the thing is, once people have reached this stage of
what does he think conservative media does? Hello?
Trump derangement syndrome, they need to confirm their bias even further, because bad faith, as it turns out, is really just a bias.
Okay. This is retarded. This is like every retarded video ever made on.
Hey, internets. So there's no denying that what happened on January 6, 2021 was a pretty stupid and pretty embarrassing display of some of the worst of
stupid and embarrassing
humanity. Riots can be, in layman's terms, described as when a bunch of adults decide to act like toddlers throwing a temper tantrum, and the violence that ensues tend to cause hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars of property damage while accomplishing, well, absolutely nothing of note. This is one of the reasons why it's important to condemn this type of behavior on all sides of the political spectrum. The vast majority of riots cause unnecessary suffering, and generally in the end just result in bad optics for the people that cause the riot, going against whatever cause they claim to believe in. Unfortunately, these bad optics can also sometimes be exploited by people on the opposing side for the sake of a political power grab through dishonest methods. And that's exactly what we see with the bizarre narrative of that the January 6th Capitol riot of 2021 was an actual serious coup attempt as an insurrection to overthrow the United States government. So in this video, I'm going to explain why this is an example of trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, which is an intellectually dishonest argument where events are greatly exaggerated, often as an attempt to play victim over a massively exaggerated wrongdoing in order to justify a heavily disproportionate response. The January 6th Capitol riot was many bad things, but calling it a coup is a really dishonest stretch of reality, and it's also completely inconsistent with the evidence of what actually happened. First off, before we even go anywhere, we must first start with forming an honest definition of what an insurrection is. This is extremely...
Okay. Let's start with forming a definition of what insurrection is. Are we going to consult old Supreme Court cases? Are we going to consult any of the historical record anywhere? Are we going to consult anything that was written by any scholars or current legal people or the Colorado Supreme Court, anybody that's like currently ruled on or talked about this? Or are we going to just make up our own fun definition? Let's find out.
Extremely important because I recently saw a debate where Destiny tried to argue.
At least you saw my debate where I had a formal definition. Or are we going to go to the dictionary? My bad. Don't ever rule out the dictionary, okay? That's a good source of truth as well.
Let's first start with forming an honest definition of what an insurrection is. This is extremely important because I recently saw a debate where Destiny tried to argue it was an insurrection while describing it as simply disruption of the peaceful transfer of power. This is a complete...
A disruption of the peaceful transfer of power? That's the only thing I said? Oh, and this is my Alex Jones, Glenn Greenwald debate. I don't know if I'd read the paper by then, but okay.
Completely nonsensical definition, since technically, if the Magat simply went to the Capitol and loudly protested the election results and never did any proper damage or any rioting, but caused the vote count to be delayed for a few minutes due to them being annoying, then technically, that would also still count as an insurrection. This was the main mistake made by Ian in this debate with Destiny, was that she allowed him to get away with this crazy definition that basically lets him call January 6th an insurrection, even if the only thing the Trumpies did was stand there with their Trump signs and seethe. In fact, pretty much any protest or riot about the election results, such as the leftist Antifa riots that happened during Trump's term, could also be subjectively argued to be a disruption of the peaceful transfer of power. Or how about Russian collusion, which turned out to be a giant nothing burger, or as the Mueller report specifically stated, did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election.
Okay, this is just retarded conservative slop.